You wanna play games? Okay. I'll play with you. Come on. Okay. You wanna play rough? Okay. Uno. Say hello to my little friend! Okay. You wanna play rough? Okay. Yeah. Okay, Yolanda!
Hello everyone, this is Pico Entertainment and we are back again, and here now we have another video in our 10 out of 10 movie review series, and this is truly a special film for I think any fan of movies, and that is the iconic gangster masterpiece Scarface. Released in December the 9th, 1983, it stars Al Pacino, exceptional in the lead role, Stephen Bauer, Michelle Pfeffier, Robert Loggia, Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, F. Murray Abraham and Paul Shenar as well, and it was also directed by acclaimed director Brian Palma. Now the setup within Scarface is that the story is set within the early 1980s with the arrival of many Cuban refugees, and we are introduced to ex-convict Tony Montana, and we see him in the beginning trying to gain registration into the American country like so many of the other refugees, and in the beginning they all have aspirations of the American dream but soon find themselves struggling as dishwashers and having far loftier ambitions. Tony soon enters the drug dealing business and begins a meteoric rise to the top of the criminal organisation, whilst ultimately being consumed by the intense excesses of becoming a drug lord. Now when we talk about great films, perfect movies, best of all times, masterpieces, for me it's always the films that work on multiple levels, have multiple themes and levels to their storytelling. These are films that really leave a lasting impression and impact on both you as a viewer and also culturally within entertainment long after they have been released. And on that basis, that's why for me, simply, Scarface remains one of the greatest films of all time. It simply is one of the most vivid, intense and immersive movies I've ever seen. Sheerly watchable and compelling from the first minute to the last. There's such a distinct, atmospheric and unique tone and direction to this film overall. As a gangster film, it's very different to the likes of other classics such as The Godfather and Goodfellas. Now in those films, there's very much of a focus on an organisation and hierarchy, almost a kind of family dynamic within the gangsters. But here in Scarface, this is much more of a straightforward solo story of a man's individual ambitions to rise to the top of the criminal empire. Now Scarface really has that raw, uncompromising and real visceral feel to it. The film is extremely ultra violent, so just in case you haven't seen the movie, beware of the intense violent scenes that we see throughout the film, but I think that's what gives the film such a constant sense of danger and energy throughout its story. This really runs right through so many great scenes that we see throughout the movie. The first of course is the first initial hit job that Tony and Manny have to perform in order to get their green card within America. We have the very infamous scene when Tony encounters the Colombian gangsters for the first time, and we have that encounter within the shower scene involving a chainsaw. Very gruesome, very intense moment within the story. Another encounter where we see after surviving a hit on himself, Tony looks for retribution against Frank and a corrupt cop. Such an iconic and brilliant scene. We have the scene when Tony collaborates on assassinating a senator who's going to out the gangsters in a television meeting, and they have to trade him down within his car, knowing that both his wife and daughter are also in the car as well. And all of these scenes are fantastic, which really help contribute to the film's overall style and intensity and impact. The movie itself is fantastically directed by Brian De Palma, who has directed some truly magnificent films. When we look at the startling horror film Carrie in the early 70s starring Sissy Spacek and John Travolta, we have the exceptional gangster movie The Untouchables in 1987 starring Kevin Costner and Sean Connery, we have the harrowing Vietnam drama Casualties of War in 1989 starring Michael J. Fox and Sean Penn. So he really has quite a substantial filmography throughout his career, but for me, and I think for so many, Scarface remains his true masterpiece. Now another main contributing factor towards this great film is the musical score by Italian composer Giorgio Moroder. The musical score itself is so steeped in the 80s tone and aesthetic, but it completely works here. We have the iconic main theme heard in the opening credits and the end credits as well as throughout the film, so iconic. We have the great song She's on Fire by Amy Holland, which is played when Tony meets Elvira for the first time in the club. We have the pulsating theme, Push It to the Limit, which is sung by Paul Edgerman. As Tony rises to the top, we get that great opening montage where we see him getting married to Elvira and rising to the top of the criminal ranks. So fantastic overall. And I also like the intense musical theme, capturing Tony's mood whenever he sees his sister in a nightclub. We get those great shots where the camera really closes in on his eyes, capturing the impending rage and intensity that is going on within his head. Again, so fantastic, just really giving it a fascinating insight into the character. So a truly great musical score throughout this movie, and one that I think is Giorgio Moroder's best work throughout his own individual career. We talk about all of the cast of actors throughout this film, and all of them provide compelling performances. Stephen Bauer as Manny, Tony's loyal companion, is very likeable and charismatic. Now, he's much more into the partying and all of the women. He's not as obsessive about rising to the top as Tony. I love all of the scenes throughout both of them together. There is such a great chemistry and dynamic. We have the extremely funny scene when Manny is trying to teach Tony how to talk to women when they flick their tongue at them, and then he gets slapped by one of them. And we have so many scenes throughout really building on a close relationship between the two, and I think that's important. It really adds a personal touch throughout the movie. Michelle Pfeffier is excellent as Elvira, seemingly very ice cold and materialistic and very opportunistic in many ways. She doesn't really have a real personal loyalty to anybody in particular. She really just attaches herself with who's the top gangster at the time. In the beginning of the movie, we see she's very much attached to Frank, and then she builds a substantial relationship with Tony over the course of the story. Now, this was Michelle Pfeiffer's second prominent role after her performance in Grease 2, and you can check out a review of that movie on my channel. And it was really Scarface where she proved, as well as being stunningly beautiful, that she could also be a very compelling and dramatic actress. So a very substantial role for Michelle Pfeiffer, who would go on to become one of the most substantial and leading actresses within the 1980s and early to mid 1990s. I also like Robert Loggia as Frank, the older current underboss who brings Tony into the criminal organisation. And Frank really is much more about enjoying life, staying small, low-key, quiet. We have that great scene between him and Tony when Tony wants to expand the business, but Frank is very wary of his connection with Sosa, and he tries to show Tony that, once again, staying small and really not trying to chase the fast position, that's what makes gangsters last in this business. But those that want it all, they don't last. Just a fantastic scene overall. And as well, I think Frank is a very likeable presence throughout the movie. I also love Paul Shenar as Sosa, who's one of the more bigger bosses in terms of the criminal organisation. Tony basically aspires to be like Sosa. We have that great scene when he's being shown around Sosa's organisation when they're trying to broker a deal with him, and he shows him around all of his mansions, and I love the dynamic between both of them. Sosa very much takes a liking to Tony because he's far more honest and blunt and straight to the point, as a scene in that negotiation scene. Extremely funny scene as well. And Sosa really is more of those articulate gangsters. He's very smart, very savvy, and he's much more of a regal character, yet there's a quiet menace under him. This is a character who you can talk to and get along with, but you can't mess around with him in any way, shape or form. And he alludes that in that great line of dialogue when he talks to Tony about not messing around with him as well. So fantastic performance from Paul Shenar. I also like the early role for Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio as Tony's sister Gina. You know, in the beginning she's very beautiful, very sweet, naive, but just like Tony, we see how corrupted she is when getting involved in a gangster life. As I mentioned before, we have those earlier scenes where Tony sees her in a nightclub and she's partying, and this really strikes a chord with him because he looks at Gina as being very pure, and he doesn't want her to be corrupted overall by the criminal organisation. And that's where we really ramp up the intensity and rage within Tony as a character. But it's a very good performance from Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio. Now, of course, for all of the direction, musical score and performances of the supporting characters, there really is one very true special reason of why Scarface is so revered, so important and such a masterpiece, and that is of course the lead performance from Al Pacino. Already an established actor due to early roles such as both The Godfather Parts 1 and 2, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon and Injustice for All, but this role for me and for so many others is really the actor at the absolute peak of his powers. From the opening scene where we see Tony, it's a great summary of the character. He's very funny, confident, loud, abrasive and very aggressive. In short, it's everything that's what's so great about the character. It's a character who for many ways is a villain as such, but there's something very appealing and alluring to him as a personality. Now, despite of the various evil deeds and backstabbings and cutthroat attitude that he has throughout the film, there does remain an underlying sense of loyalty and integrity. He talks about not lying or not taking a deal on the side but never turning frank. So there is a certain conviction about the character that I think makes you like him. Now, you simply can't take your eyes off him in terms of a personality. From start to finish, Al Pacino exhibits a truly immense screen presence that's so memorable right throughout the film. So many great scenes and lines and quotes that have really standed in terms of long-term culture in entertainment. You know, we look at earlier on in the film, I kill a communist for fun, but for a green card, I'm going to carve him up real nice. Then we have, first you get the money, then you get the power. When you get the power, then you get the women. That great scene and the dinner table between him, Manny and Elvira, when really this is at the later stages of the movie where we see Tony really succumbing to the excesses of being involved in this lifestyle, and he talks about the bad guy and that this is the last bad guy that you're ever going to see. So iconic, so important overall. And really Tony as a personality, what makes him I think so appealing to watch is that there's a real conviction and fearlessness about him. No matter how much adversity he comes across, he never backs down, he always takes on a challenge head on, and that really inspires you anyway to the character, and you want to ultimately see him succeed despite the fact that he performs many evil acts throughout the movie. Tony's arc throughout the story is utterly compelling as we see him become more unhinged and explosive as the story goes on, and he really embodies the tone of the film itself, reaching high levels of excess and intensity. Now, all of this culminates in the film's iconic and masterful climax, for me one of the greatest ever endings to a movie of all time. This is essentially Tony making his final stand, beginning with that quote, of course, that iconic line, "Say hello to my little friend." So memorable, so impactful, such a huge part of the film's legacy. It's powerful and impact, really keeping in the film's message overall of how ambition can gain success but ultimately lead to somebody's demise. And it's all of these scenes, all of these iconic quotes, all of these great passages throughout the film that really confirms for me that in this movie we are simply looking at the greatest cinematic performance from a leading actor within any films. And for me, Al Pacino is the greatest leading actor of all time. I really can't think of another performance that's as compelling, as vivid, as impactful and so watchable over a 2.5 hour runtime. I'm quite happy to debate this with other people, but for me it truly is the greatest acting performance of all time. And in Scarface we are simply looking at one of the greatest gangster films of all time, and also one of the greatest movies that I think has ever been produced within all of cinema and entertainment. So as we all know by now, within this movie review series, the overall score, 10 out of 10 of course. Many people will give it even a higher score for that, and that's fair enough. So we look at the overall release of Scarface, and on a budget of between 23 to 37 million, it grossed over 66 million at the box office, so we could indicate that the film had found success commercially. But the real interesting aspect is, on its initial release, the film was met with a lot of negativity from critics who were very unhappy with the movie's hyper-violent scenes and foul language. At the time it had one of the big records in terms of the F-bombs being used. I think it was shortly surpassed by the likes of Martin Scorsese's movies, both Goodfellas and Casino. But Scarface itself was also met with a lot of criticism from members of the Cuban community who didn't like how the film represented their demographic, and also didn't like the fact that many Cuban characters were being played by actors who weren't Cuban or of Cuban descent, and many of them felt that this took away a lot of the film's authenticity overall. Now, I don't disagree with this. I think as long as the actor looks like the role and they provide a satisfactory accent and they can convince you that they do come from the individual country, then I believe that's good enough overall. But as with all great masterpieces, the film's impact really transcends culture over a number of years, and that's very much the case with Scarface. And I think even by today's generation, it is now rightly recognised as one of the greatest movies of all time, one of the most impactful and influential movies of all time. The status of Tony Montana, his presence, his iconography is all there for everybody to see. And in general, when you look at Al Pacino's career, if you were to do a top 10 list or a top 5 list of what will be his greatest performances overall, then his role as Tony Montana would be right up there. And that's, for me, why, along with the direction and the music and the overall story and compelling performances, along with Al Pacino's iconic portrayal of Tony Montana, all of those factors is why, for me, Scarface is a 10 out of 10 movie and still remains today as one of the greatest masterpieces of all time. Those are my overall thoughts and feelings and review on Scarface. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think, like me, it's one of the greatest gangster films, or in general one of the greatest films of all time? How do you think it ranks in the filmography of Brian De Palma? Do you think it's one of his best movies or one of his worst movies? In terms of Al Pacino, where do you think it ranks in his overall career? Do you think it's his best role, or do you think there are other roles, in particular Dog Day Afternoon, Serpico, or Carlito's Way, or Donnie Brasco? Do you think those performances stand up in comparison, or do you think Scarface is still out there amongst the true peak of his overall career as well? If you have any other films directed by Brian De Palma or Al Pacino, then let me know in the comments and I'll provide reviews for those films as well. If you indeed had any other films that you believe are 10 out of 10 masterpieces, let me know in the comments, and if I agree with you, then I'll provide reviews for those movies as well on this channel. Please also hit and like those subscription buttons and notifications so I can provide you with more high quality content and reviews like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.